We will go ahead and get started. So welcome again to everyone to our workshop today, Information Literacy, Teaching Responsible and Ethical Information Practices. I'm really excited to have you all here today. So as we go ahead and jump in, I'm going to take a minute to just check and see how everyone is feeling today. So we have some options up here on the screen: frustrated, excited, sleepy, confused, amused, or maybe just zombie, which is totally understandable. So please feel free to share if you are comfortable how you are feeling in the chat today. If none of these options match, feel free to add your own as well. So we'll give everyone a few seconds to respond. Let's see, we've got excited, amused, sleepy, too busy. Yeah, busy definitely probably should have been an option on there. Excited, amused, excited, great. We've got a zombie in there. So yeah, definitely understand that one. Neutral, energized, grateful. Yeah, thank you. Wonderful. So sleepy, yeah, definitely understand that one. So thank you all so much for sharing how you all are doing today. I hope everyone will have a really great day. So if you're not feeling wonderful at the moment, hopefully your day will get better. Oh, we have another zombie in there. Definitely understand. Yep. All right. So as folks who've been to one of my workshops before know, I also generally like to start with a quick little trivia activity just for fun. So today we have some global capitals trivia. So we have capital cities here. And if you know the country that matches that particular capital city, you can feel free to go ahead and put your responses in the chat. All right, so responses coming in. Let's see. Amy has A as Australia, and yep, you are definitely correct, Amy. Let's see, Megan has C as Chile, and you are correct as well there. Let's see, we have another Austria. Emily had D as Iceland, Janelle as well. Several folks there got Iceland. It seems like Reykjavik is a pretty popular capital. Megan had E as Kenya, correct. Amy had F as Bangladesh, which, yep, you are definitely correct. E as Kenya. So Brian, yep, you got all of those correctly, Kenya. Nicole had G as Nicaragua, so correct there as well. And then let's see, Emily had B as Belarus, which is also correct. So I think that we did get all of them. So well done, everyone. Here are the correct answers in case we missed any of them. So Australia, Belarus, Chile, Iceland, Kenya, Bangladesh, and Nicaragua. So thank you everyone for participating in our trivia activity. And we'll go ahead and then give a quick introduction for anyone who doesn't know me. My name is Jane Hammonds. I am an assistant professor in the university libraries. I am the teaching and learning engagement librarian. My email is hammonds.73@oosu.edu. Please feel free to email me after the presentation if you have any questions, comments, or problems. We'd love to talk more about information literacy. I did want to just remind everyone that if you are affiliated with Ohio State, participating in this workshop does count for credit toward the teaching information literacy endorsement. And I've put in the chat some links there where you can access the workshop reflection and the workshop tracking that will allow you to keep track of all of the workshops that you attend. If you do have any questions about completing that endorsement, please just let me know. No, I don't want to click on a link. Sorry. It's trying to move me forward. All right. So what are we going to be doing here today is we're going to talk a little bit about what constitutes responsible and ethical information practices. We'll think about the core information literacy concepts and habits and skills that are related to ethical information use. And then we'll review some strategies and activities. Excuse me. All right. If you are affiliated with Ohio State, this is just a quick reminder that in the new general education that will be starting this fall, responsible civil and ethical information practices is part of the expected learning outcomes for writing information literacy, and then just generally for the program as well. We want students to demonstrate responsible and ethical information practices. All right. So we'll go ahead and move into our opening discussion. And what we'd like to do here is just start by having a chance for everyone to think about what exactly responsible civil and ethical information practices actually are, or what they look like. So we're going to answer this question using a Jamboard. The link to that Jamboard is in the chat. I'll put that in there one more time in case you missed that. So you should see that Jamboard link that will take you out to that. So we'll go ahead and go out to the Jamboard. And, should be able to find it somewhere. All right, so hopefully everyone should be seeing the Jamboard now. If you're not, please let me know. And if you haven't used one of these before, the easiest way to add a comment is to go over here on the left-hand side, click on Sticky Note. That will allow you to put your thoughts there, and you can just go ahead and post that into the Jamboard. So we'll give you a chance to respond, and this can be, responsible civil ethical information practices within the academic context, but you're also free to think more broadly about, in general, what you consider to be responsible civil and ethical information practices. Excuse me again, sorry. So we see responses that are coming in. So we'll give everyone just a few more seconds to respond. Go ahead and continue to add. So as we take a look at some of these responses here, we see a lot of commonalities across the responses. So a lot of references to providing attributions or to providing citations, giving credit for the work that has been done by others, right? So not plagiarizing, citing. We also see some that are related to like following copyright or legal acquisition of research materials, not misrepresenting others' ideas. We see some that are related to not resharing information that is untruthful, unethical, uncivil, including on social media. So going to the source and not relying on others' versions of that work. Just honesty up there, I think that's really important as well. Demonstrating your intellectual debt, right? Not ignoring work that we don't agree with. Yeah, so these are all great examples of responsible civil and ethical information practices. So thank you all for sharing those. Go ahead and go back to our presentation. So a few things that I wanted to highlight. So a lot of the responses were centered around, providing appropriate attribution, getting permission, use information created. As I mentioned, a few folks talked about sort of accessing information legally. So through legal channels, and that can, involve complying with copyright laws, intellectual property laws. A few folks mentioned things around, how we share information with others. So making sure that we're not sharing information that is incorrect or, inappropriate to be sharing. I also did want to highlight just general, civility in your interactions online with others, as well as, thinking really carefully about your own role as an information creator and how you share your work, whether you're going to license your work, whether you're going to have like open accessing publishing, so making those kinds of decisions as well. So we're talking, I think, sort of really big picture here about what ethical information practices are, within the academic context, but also more broadly, and our interactions with others, just the way that we use and share information in our day-to-day lives as well. So with that in mind, I want to present, just as a kind of a thought exercise, a couple scenarios. So I'll read each of these scenarios really quickly, and then we'll have a chance to think about them and discuss what we think is ethical behavior within that particular situation. So the first scenario, student A writes a paper for her sociology course. In the paper, she includes information that she takes directly from the slides that her instructor provides in class. She does not provide a citation for this information. Her instructor considers this to be plagiarism and reports the student to COAM. So non-Ohio State folks, COAM is our Committee on Academic Misconduct. So in this situation, we can think, is the student acting in an ethical manner, and is the instructor acting in an ethical manner? So that is our first scenario. I want to introduce our second scenario really quickly. Scenario B is instructor X is angry that the required textbook, which she did not choose, is $200. She knows that many of her students will not be able to afford this, so she provides students with a link to a site that allows them to access a PDF version of the book for free. So in this scenario, is the instructor acting in an ethical manner? So those then are our two scenarios here. So the first is student taking information from slides, using it in her paper, and being reported for plagiarism. Second is an instructor providing a link to a PDF version of a book for students. So I'd love to hear your thoughts that anyone feels comfortable sharing about the ethics of information behavior within these two scenarios. So you can feel free, if you want, to place your response in the chat. If you also would prefer to unmute yourself and speak up, we can also, that is also welcome as well. And I did get a message in, Alan. Do you plan to share the recording and your slides? Yes, definitely will afterwards, Alan. So we do have a comment coming in for scenario B. Emily shares that putting a copy on course reserve would be a more responsible way to deal with this very real barrier. Excellent. For scenario A, Kate shared, is what the instructor shared in class common knowledge, or did she provide citations to the sources? That's a great point as well. Day shared, for A, the instructor jumping right to reporting the student seems a bit of a nuclear option. They could probably meet with the student first to get more details. So Megan shared A, no to both. This seems a misunderstanding by the student involving common knowledge, and I comment on that, and an overreaction by the professor. So it should be addressed with the student first before moving to COAM. And Hope raised a great question, right? Did the instructor give specific instructions about using material from class? I think that's a really great point. It's something that I don't think that we always do. I know I have struggled with that in the past myself. Amanda shared B, is the PDF violating copyright? If so, unethical. So we'll give it just a few more seconds to see if other folks have any additional comments about those scenarios. So B shared, instructor was correct to report to COAM for scenario A. If they suspect misconduct, they are required to do so. COAM can dismiss it if it is a misunderstanding. Hope shared for B, yes, definitely unethical. Okay, so thank you all for sharing your thoughts on those. The reason why I wanted to raise those scenarios was just to get us thinking a little bit about some of the nuance involved in ethical information practices. We may on the surface say that it's very easy to say, this is ethical information behavior and this is not. But I think even in some of the comments that we had coming in, we had a little bit of disagreement or uncertainty. There was more context that was needed for folks to be able to make a really clear judgment. For scenario A, for example, we had a few folks say, I don't think this is worthy of submitting yet to COAM. Other folks saying, yes, we should. That's what we're supposed to do. That's the standard practice, right? So I wanted to raise this again, just to get to some of the complexities of these issues in terms of information, ethical information practice, and how it's not maybe always as easy as we might think. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well as we go through the rest of the workshop. So again, thank you all for sharing those. So let's think a little bit about what are the core information literacy concepts, practices, and dispositions that are related to responsible, civil, and ethical information use. Basically, what we're going to look at in this section is what do students really need to understand about information, about scholarship, about research to really be able to act ethically? What do they need to be able to do? So what are the skills that they need or the practices that we would like them to develop? And then what habits or dispositions would we like them to develop? So we're going to try to highlight some examples of these in this. There's no way we'll be able to cover everything, but we'll try to highlight a few things. So I would like to start by thinking about some of the core sort of understandings that students need. And I'm basing this on, as some of you might be familiar with, some may not, the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education, which is a document that was developed by the Association of College and Research Libraries. And what this document tries to do is to highlight those core critical understandings or practices that experienced researchers or information users sort of know and understand, perhaps without even consciously realizing that they do, but that sort of drive their information practices and that often drive our expectations for student performance. So the framework highlights 6 core critical understandings that students need to develop as they move on the spectrum from novice to more experienced researcher or information user more broadly. So the 3 that I want to highlight today are authority is constructed and contextual, information has value, and scholarship as conversation. The first one I want to highlight, because I think this, of course, is really key to ethical information behavior, is this understanding that information has value. Right? I know that on the surface that may seem very simple, but I don't know if it's always something that we really talk about enough with students so that they understand and recognize all of the different ways that information has value and how that connects to their own practices and information use. So the core, understanding of information has value, the core concept is just that information has many different types of value, and that because information has value, or because it's in a sense a type of commodity, there are legal and ethical restrictions and guidelines around how we access and share and use information. So that's sort of the basic foundation of that concept. I would like us to talk about this a little bit more. So we'll go ahead and we'll do another Jamboard activity really quickly and talk about what are some of the ways that information has value? Or you can think about it a different way. What are some of the ways that information is used? Right. So again, we'll go ahead, we'll go out to the Jamboard. I'm gonna share again. And we'll be using the same Jamboard, and you can just, up here on the top, you'll see your options here to move between one Jamboard and the other. So you can go back and forth there. So you can now post your responses on the second Jamboard. So what are some of the different ways that information has value. So we'll give everyone a few more seconds to post their responses. So some of the responses that we see coming in are talking about the ways that information can be used to persuade or to inform and to mislead, right? So information influences, how we make decisions. We use information to educate ourselves. We have a response here that the value can be in the form of payment, prestige, or likes. So I think that's a great point. Like sometimes the value is actually, financial value, monetary value, but sometimes the value is about prestige, right? We have, as someone who works in publishing, so much time and work goes into it, and expecting it to be for free isn't fair to those who do it. And I think that's a really great point as well, thinking about the value that it has to the creator, right, of that information and all the time and effort that is put in creating things. So financial value can be packaged into a product, can differentiate your product from another. Right, so great. Yeah, these are all really great responses of, giving a really good understanding of all of the different ways that information has value. And I think it's really great that it highlights, the value that information has for a consumer, but the value that information has as, the creators of information as well. And the way that information can be used to influence and to, mislead. I think all of those are really important things to highlight when we think about how information has value. So we think about that, then we think about all of the things that students need to know and understand when we think about this idea that information has value. So, they need to recognize all of the different political or legal or, economic interests that may be influencing information production and access and dissemination. Right, because information has value, because it, in many cases is a commodity, right? Not everyone has the same access to information, right? Not everyone can afford broadband internet access. Everyone can't afford to buy the books that they need, or they can't afford, database access, right? So not everyone has the same access. And as folks mentioned in their comments, information can be used in so many different ways to advocate for political or social or economic personal change, and not always change that we might agree with. So it can be used deliberately to mislead, to create change in certain ways. And so all of those are things that students really have to understand and grasp to really understand why it's important to use information ethically. And I think it's important to highlight here again that our students are both information consumers and information creators, and they have rights and responsibilities. They have decisions that they make that are associated with each role. Okay, so two other concepts that I want to highlight just really quickly are this concept of scholarship as conversation. So this idea that scholars or researchers or professionals more broadly within a field are always engaged in these ongoing discussions, and they're sharing ideas and research findings. And as we've already talked about, part of participating in these conversations is recognizing the requirement to provide appropriate attribution and to use the information or the works that have been created by others in an ethical, responsible manner. And then I also wanted to highlight the concept of authority as constructed and contextual. Right, so this is this idea that all of the information sources we use have different levels of authority. Some information is more trustworthy than others. And so part of the responsibility of ethical information use is taking the time to evaluate the information that we are looking at and making careful decisions about what information we use or that we share, taking the time to make sure that we're not sharing false or inaccurate information with others. To be able to do that, though, you have to understand and recognize what makes an authoritative or appropriate or trustworthy source. So those are some of the key concepts that I wanted to highlight. So what are the things, again, that we want our students to be able to do when we think about ethical information practice? Here are some of the things, and these are just a few examples of the things, again, we've talked about already. We want students to give credit to the ideas of others. We want students to be able to recognize plagiarism and fair use, copyright, and understand what those are and when they need to get permission to use certain types of information. We want them to understand that not everyone has the same access to information and to recognize what that might mean for themselves, for the people that they are working with, the people that they are trying to communicate in whatever way they are trying to communicate with them. We have to want students to think about how their own information is a type of commodity and think carefully about the information that they share about themselves or that they share about others. And so take that responsibility of thinking through their online interactions, engagements, and being careful in terms of issues of privacy, those kinds of things. So those are some of the key knowledge practices that I wanted to highlight related to ethical information use. And then just some of the dispositions, and this goes back especially to one of the comments in the Jamboard about it's not fair to others, right? So you have to have respect for how much time and effort it takes to create information and have that respect for the ideas of others, right? We want students to think of themselves as both information consumers and creators, and to think a little bit about their own particular information privilege, wherever that might be, right? Okay, so that's just a quick run through of some of what I see as key understandings, practices, and skills that we would like students to develop. I'll take a pause here to see if there are any questions or comments that anyone would like to share at this point. If anyone has ideas for anything else that students really need to understand to be able to engage ethically with information. We'll give it just 30 seconds. So Kate shared, information cultures between disciplines do vary. That is a great point, Kate, and I'm gonna bring that up again in just a second. Yep. Okay. So I am going to talk in a minute about some of the reasons why this is such a challenge for students. So Nicole shared, students need to understand how to identify what needs to be cited and how to cite properly for the field. Yes, absolutely. So I do want to think a little bit back to the scenarios that we talked about at this point, and some of the discussion, about whether the actions were always ethical. So I want to raise just maybe kind of a provocative point at this time, which everyone may not agree with, which is fine. But one part of the framework really emphasizes this idea that researchers, scholars, professionals, just individuals in general, are responsible for making deliberate and informed choices about when to comply with and when to contest current legal and socioeconomic practices concerning the value of information. Right, so as we've already talked about, we know that we're in a sort of an information environment where not everyone has the same access to information. because of the legal restrictions, the financial restrictions involved in being able to access information. And there may be, maybe reasons why someone would legitimately have disagreements with copyright law, for example, and may make a deliberate decision to not comply with copyright law. And again, I'm not advocating this, but I am raising the point that, thinking about ethical information practices, I think also does involve thinking about sort of the environment that we live in and the challenges that are associated with information access, and whether or not there might be cause for not, only teaching students to always comply with the rules. So this is a quote that librarian Donna Witek has in an article where she's talking about information literacy. And it kind of raises this perspective of critical information literacy. This idea that our job is not just to encourage students to live or survive within the systems that currently exist, but our job is to help them recognize the inequities of the systems that they currently exist and to think about how they might go about encouraging change within those particular systems. So again, I'm just raising this sort of as a think point in terms of thinking about what ethical information behavior is. You think back to the scenario where the instructor provided students with a PDF of the book. From that instructor's perspective, they may be acting in an ethical manner because they know that many of their students can't pay for that book, right? But as we also saw in the Jamboard comments, someone spent a lot of time and effort writing that book, and they deserve, credit and they deserve payment for what they did. So what is the ethical behavior in that situation? So again, I'm not advocating that we teach our students to violate copyright law at all, but I'm just raising a critical discussion point. And I would love to hear if anyone has any questions or comments related to that before we go ahead and move forward. So Kate shared, almost all institutions have ethical guidelines that you're expected to sign off on. And that's a really great point, Kate, right? This idea that we acknowledge as part of the benefits that we get from joining a particular system, that there are certain rules or regulations that we are supposed to follow, right? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So Brian shared, for students to choose to violate the rules, they first need to learn the rules and show that they know what they are. Only then can they make an informed choice to violate them. I think that is a really great point, Brian, right? We have to learn how to do it before we can, do it the wrong way, right? So yeah, learn the rules, know what it is that they are supposed to be doing, know what those regulations are, and from then they can make the choice, right? Yeah. We'll give it just 30 more seconds to see if anyone has any additional questions or comments. And again, please don't go out and say that Jane told you to, teach your students to violate copyright and plagiarize. So. Okay. So any other comments or thoughts come in, please go ahead and share those. And we'll go ahead and move forward and think about, we can, really quickly, I'm going to go through this. What are some of the reasons why it is so challenging? It can be so challenging for students to really understand what ethical or responsible information behavior is. So just a few things that I want to highlight here. First of all, we live in this information environment where our students have grown up where it seems like everything that they need is available online for free, right? So all of that work that goes into those information resources, all of that stuff is intangible, and all the student sees is, hey, here's a copy of this that's available here. Why shouldn't I use it? Right. So, we've grown up in this, not we, not me, our students have grown up in this environment where it's so easy to share and copy and reuse. So are the ways that we have traditionally thought about authorship or ownership of information, does that really fit with this sort of digital information environment that our students have been growing up in? Right. So that's one thing, is that the students just, again, may not even recognize the actual value of the information because of the system that they have been living in. I also want to highlight just how complex some of the different rules and guidelines can be. If we think about, we try to teach a little bit about copyright in one of our classes, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's just so confusing. And this is an example when we come to thinking about plagiarism. And this is from a blog post from the Visual Communications Guide that highlights 13 different versions of plagiarism. And you can see the very complicated flow chart that goes into trying to determine whether or not you plagiarize, right? And this is it's not always easy to determine, especially for students who are novices with academic and research in general, novices with disciplinary research. So, what appropriate information practices, what plagiarism is, it's not always completely obvious to someone who's just learning how to, just being socialized into academic information behavior. Disciplinary difference. So Kate, you mentioned this one earlier, right? There's all of these different citation styles, and each citation style has different ways that information is supposed to be used in terms of how you integrate information. So how you incorporate quotes or citations. Students may be taking 4 or 5 different classes that have different citation styles. And so expecting that our students are automatically going to understand and recognize the appropriate citation style within our discipline and know how to use it, I think, is a little unrealistic at times. And I also wanted to highlight this issue of cultural differences, right? So intellectual property, plagiarism, these are not common sort of knowledge across all cultures. There are certain cultures where copying from others is considered like a sign of respect, right? And so this idea that a student is supposed to produce their own perspective is not, not something that's emphasized. And so, intellectual property, not everyone has the same laws related to intellectual property. So we have a lot of students who may be coming in from different backgrounds that may be unfamiliar with the appropriate guidelines or rules or regulations for information use within our particular academic context. And then I just wanted to highlight again, and I used this last week as well, from First Draft, this information disorder, just to highlight in terms of ethical information use very generally, in terms of not sharing inaccurate information. How hard this is, because there's so many people out there that are deliberately trying to deceive us and sharing misleading context with us, and we can make one mistake and we don't take that time to evaluate that information really quickly, and we pass it on without really thinking about it, and then we unwittingly contributed to the spread of false information, right? So it's really, there's a lot of reasons why I think that students might struggle with always identifying and acting and behaving in an ethical manner when it comes to information use. So we'll again pause there. I see we have some comments coming in. If you have any other comments, questions, any other ideas that you have about why you think students might struggle in terms of using information ethically, please feel free to share. Okay. So Kate shared, just think how many intricacies are available in Creative Commons licenses. I think that is such a great point. Like, yeah, there's so many different forms and types and recognizing. And I was in a workshop not long ago where we did a quiz and like, I got the answers on Creative Commons wrong. And then Kate also shared, I remember how many Chinese libraries had collections of photocopies. In other words, it was accepted, if not truly ethical. Yeah. Give it just 10 more seconds to see if there are any more comments, and then we'll talk about strategies and activities. So how can we help our students to learn to demonstrate ethical, civil, responsible information behaviors? The first thing that I have as a strategy, and it's really just sort of like a recommendation, is that we all take some time to really question our assumptions about what our students know and understand about ethical information behavior. So do they really know? I don't want to say that they don't always, but there are cases, I think, where students are truly unaware that what they are doing is not considered ethical or responsible information behavior. So just thinking about, students have very different backgrounds coming in. Many students will have had very limited guidance or instruction in areas like plagiarism and citations. And so thinking about what do my students actually know? And then more specifically within my discipline, do they, are they familiar with what ethical information behavior within my particular discipline looks like? A student may generally know that they need to provide citations, but not know what it looks like in your particular field, how to do that correctly. So that's really my first strategy. My second one is to be as explicit as you can. So making sure that students know your specific requirements for information use. If in an informal writing in a discussion post, do you really expect them to cite there? Students may not think about that as a place where citation is necessary. Or if you go back and think about the first scenario we had where student included information from the PowerPoint slides in her paper and didn't cite them. The student, just may not recognize that you are expecting them to cite that information. So making those expectations clear. If you have the chance, considering allowing options for times when students can use more informal or functional citations. So, maybe just, providing the name and the link rather than having to do a full MLA or, APA citation. So that we can kind of reduce the burden a little bit of the information that students have to provide to us. So those are two quick strategies. And then I just want to highlight a few sample kinds of activities. So one thing, if you think about the first strategy about questioning your assumptions, how do you know what students know or don't know about citation or plagiarism or copyright? So this is where you can do something like a really quick true-false activity where you give students statements related to ethical information use or a specific topic like plagiarism, and have students discuss whether those statements are true or false. And you can do that, for example, with a Mentimeter poll, Top Hat poll, some sort of interactive way where students can discuss and debate particular types of statements. So one example statement, paraphrasing information without providing citation is plagiarism. Right. So in my experience, paraphrasing is one of the things that students are very confused on. So a statement like this could lead to some good discussion that you could have about, what paraphrasing actually is, and why you need to provide a citation, even if you're only paraphrasing. So another activity that you could do, I have a video that I've created on information has value, and other libraries have also created information created really great videos on information has value. So you could have students do the kind of activity that we did earlier. Ask them what types of value information has, what it means to them to say information has value. Talk about that, show them one of the videos and let them reflect again on that video on the value, have that discussion. So just similar to what we did earlier. Also similar to what we did, we can do some collaborative definition building. So exactly the activity that we did where we talked about what is responsible civil and ethical information behavior. Or you could be more specific, plagiarism, copyright, fair use, whatever particular aspect that you are really interested in focusing on, have them work together to develop a definition of what that is, or what practices constitute plagiarism or copyright infringement. You could do various types of ethical information use scenarios, as we also did earlier. And so you could do that, for example, in a Canvas discussion board, or whatever your LMS system might be, posting a scenario and having students debate and discuss within the discussion board whether or not they consider that to be ethical use. And again, these could be very broad, or they could be specific situations to ethical information use in your particular discipline or in your particular course. So various types of guided quizzes. We use these sometimes in the classes that we teach. And so basically what this is a quiz where students have a question. They put their response in, and then the next response is the next page of the quiz. They get the correct answer and they get an explanation right away. So we use this for copyright specifically in one of our classes because we think that this is a really complicated topic, and we think that students need feedback right away on whether their answers are correct or not. So in Canvas, if you're using Canvas, they can be a little tricky to build these. It doesn't have a easy function that allows you to do this. But if you were interested in doing something like this on copyright or plagiarism or citations or any other type of topic that you think is relevant to this, let me know and be happy to kind of talk you through how we created these quizzes. But we've found that they've been really helpful because they do provide students with that feedback right away as soon as they put their answer in. Various things that you could do to help students understand disciplinary information practices. One example would be to have students annotate an article from your discipline and identify, how is the author incorporating outside sources? How do they include a citation? Do they do any direct quotes? Is that common in our field to do those kinds of things so that they can go through and think about, here's what information practice looks like in this particular discipline. Very similar, if your field has ethical guidelines around publication or just information use more generally, you could have students locate and discuss, reflect on those particular guidelines. So one example I hear is ethical guidelines to the publication of chemical research. But other fields and disciplines will have other similar documents that you could have students look at and discuss, reflect on. Another type of creative activity that you could do that we find really helpful for a couple of different reasons is have students create infographics related to particular ethical information use scenarios or practices. So plagiarism or copyright. This one is from Auburn University, where they talk about ethical literacy around sharing photos, right, and adding photos. And so you can have students highlight what ethical practice looks like for that particular scenario. One of the reasons we really like this assignment as well is students are actually practicing ethical information use because you could have them identify the appropriate Creative Commons license for their own. So thinking about themselves as the information creator, if they were going to share their infographic, what Creative Commons license might they apply if they wanted to do that. So lots of different ways that you could use infographics to really sort of engage students with these kinds of questions and issues. Okay. So we'll take a pause there and see if anyone has any additional questions, comments. If you have ideas or activities that you've used to help students better understand ethical information practices. I would love to hear about those. So we'll just take a pause again. Got a few minutes left. Actually managed to get done within the time period of the workshop. While you're thinking, in case there's anything else that you would like to share, just a few resources that I want to highlight. I've mentioned our instructor resources at University Library site before. I did want to highlight that on that site, we do have a specific page. Let's see if I can find the right one. Sorry about that. Related to ethical information use. So you can see here that we have a lot of readings around citations and plagiarism, common knowledge, quoting sources. Many of those you can see are from Choosing and Using Sources, which is our open access textbook. We have some videos here on citations. These are some great ones from North Carolina, University of North Carolina. And plagiarism, some additional helpful videos, and a few activities here as well around citations, plagiarism, that might be valuable to you as well. In addition, and I just mentioned this, I wanted to highlight Choosing and Using Sources, a guide to academic research. This is a free open access textbook that anyone can use and teach in their courses. And this one has information on ethical use, citing sources, challenges in citing sources. And there's also a companion instructor resources site to that with some additional activities as well. So you can feel free to take a look at that. And then I have some links here to just some additional citations. And again, I'll send the PowerPoint out to everyone so you can access any of these links in terms of citations, plagiarism, information has value. Okay, so we've come to the end of the workshop. I would love to hear any ideas that you have about, again, assignments or activities that you use, key takeaways from this workshop, any questions that you have. And we'll just wanted to mention really quickly, we do have 2 more workshops coming up in the workshop series. Hopefully we'll be adding another one very shortly as well. And if there are any topics that you would like to have discussed in a workshop, I just put the links in there. That last link to the Mentimeter, that should allow you to post any topics that you would like to see for upcoming workshops. I'd love to hear your ideas on what you would like to see coming up. Okay, so we'll go back here and questions, comments, takeaways. The floor is now open. So Brian shared, often assign an early rough draft that requires the references to be listed and citations in the text as appropriate, but the paper can be really rough. It's a chance to get feedback on their sources and when they cite them. Yes, thank you, Brian. That is an excellent way to give students that feedback that they need, so that we're thinking about how they're using information in their papers, what they're citing, how they're citing, and to make sure that we're not waiting until the very end and then punishing them for not doing it right when they haven't had any feedback at the beginning. So yeah, scaffolding that kind of that feedback into the assignments, I think, is really valuable. So Kate shared, as role models, we should be modeling appropriate behaviors. Yeah, I think that's a really great point.